Hundreds of children have been killed and wounded since the start of the war in Ukraine, and many thousands more have been traumatized by the violence they've witnessed. But there's only limited capacity for professional treatment, with many facilities destroyed or evacuated because of Russian attacks.
A recent CDC study is shedding new light on the pandemic's impact on mental health.
A national emergency, more children suffering from mental health problems during the pandemic.
Reading about climate change is like reading about the apocalypse. To think that like this is what we're leaving our kids as it gets rapidly worse and worse and worse feels like such a horrifying.
This latest coronavirus wave is putting more pressure on an already drained healthcare system. It's also causing an unprecedented mental health crisis. Studies show doctors and nurses are nearly twice as likely to die by suicide as people in other professions.
Suicide is an especially prominent topic in hip-hop right now, with rappers of all different lanes expressing their views on
that when it comes to mental health, we can and we will make it a priority by leading the way.
It's been a taboo subject, and in some communities it still is. If you're a black man in Britain, you're 17 times more likely to be diagnosed with a serious mental health condition than if you're white.
Speaking out about mental health after two of her daughters ended their own lives less than.
The story reminds us that some people are struggling, and those experts say it doesn't matter how talented you are or how famous you are. They're hoping that people will still reach out and get the tools they need to help navigate those challenges.
Desperate to leave, but no easy way out. Navy desertions more than doubling in just 2 years. There were 157 new deserters last year. That compares to 98 in 2020 and 63 in 2019. This is all according to U.S. Navy data. That increase raising concerns about suicide and a mental health crisis in the military.
In tonight's Eye on America, we focus our attention on female veterans and mental health. Women are the fastest growing demographic in the military, and the VA says they're also almost twice as likely to suffer from mental health issues than men. Some of the reasons include they're more likely to experience sexual trauma and struggle with adjusting to life after the military.
You deserve access to the mental health care that you need. You deserve support and understanding when you are struggling. And you deserve working conditions that support your mental health.
The world is evolving and changing every day. You don't have to go about it by yourself. We are not alone. Welcome to FreeSpring Mental Wellness Summit, hosted by GatherVerse. I'm Christopher Lafayette, founder of GatherVerse, and we are so happy to have you with us today. The Metaverse. The Metaverse is advancing. It's emerging. The more we move further into emerging technologies, I believe the more important it is for us to have a better appreciation of humanity-first standards of accessibility, education, wellness, equality, community development, safety, and privacy. We are in different times. Things are changing. And for me, If we're ever going to have an appreciation of the value in the metaverse, we must first have an appreciation of the value of humanity. Thank you for joining. It's time to explore. We have some wonderful and terrific speakers to express with us today. May our gather be well.
Hello, my name is Nia Salomons, and I am the co-founder of Anomi XR. It's a virtual reality app for therapists and coaches to meet, make safe spaces, guide, and co-create with their clients. Thank you so much for having me here at the FreeSpring Mental Wellness Summit 2022. I'm going to be talking about how storytelling and narrative are pivotal for our mental health and how it's related to what we're building at Anomi XR. A professor at my university asked me, why are you in mental health? Because you studied filmmaking. And that is true, but therapy and coaching is all about storytelling. So there are a lot of parallels because it's all about the stories that we tell ourselves and that we believe in. So today I'm going to be talking about how narrative and storytelling is at the core for treating and helping our mental health. What differentiates us humans from animals is that we believe in fictional stories, in narratives. And Yuval Noah Harari, the writer of *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind, talks about the importance of storytelling and myths in society. By repeating the same story over and over and over again from very, very early on as a child, and you grow up hearing the same story, there's very little chance that you'll doubt this narrative. But when there are conflicting stories, big crises arise, wars arise. You can see this in religious wars where there are basically different factions fighting to have their narrative win. Right now in the West, we believe in some basic narratives right now. We believe in humanism, we believe in human rights, and the basic myth of capitalism for the economy, for example. Naval goes on to say that basically we've got several different narratives in our mind at the same time. And if one fails, we go to another, we switch over. Germany, for example, went from Nazism to communism to capitalism, all within the same sort of country, geographic, and people. So that is proof that we as people, as a nation, we can forget old stories if they fail and turn to new ones. If you grew up being told that you were dirty or ugly because you had darker skin, you are more likely going to believe it. If you see it in every single media format, in every narrative, film, TV, radio, book, social media, in the way it's reflected onto you at home, at school, in every social interaction that you have, you're more likely going to believe it. You're going to believe that narrative. That perspective might become your truth. And because it's all around you, you might not question it. But what if you had an opposing narrative that said your dark skin was desirable and beautiful? What if you could change that narrative in your mind? That is the power of storytelling and narrative. When do we start processing all of these narratives that people project onto us? Well, it starts very early on. It starts off in the womb, where babies are learning languages from their mother. After only a couple of hours of being born, babies can differentiate between their native language and a foreign language. So our ability to discern language and narrative starts from very, very early on. However, that doesn't enable us to discern what's truthful or what's accurate in a narrative. So as an infant, we're very connected to our bodies, our emotions. Kids don't have a filter. And as we grow up, we are taught by those around us, by society, our families, our environment, what's good and what's bad. Good and bad, according to what exists or what narratives exist at the moment. When a child is confronted with a problem, they basically have two different basic coping mechanisms. The first one is the attempt to solve the problem. So when a child can make a change to address a problem, they engage in problem-focused coping by identifying the trouble and making a plan to deal with it. The second one is to tolerate an emotion. So when a child thinks that the problem is unsolvable, they engage in emotion-focused coping, which is basically learning to tolerate and control distress. And oftentimes, children aren't taught emotional self-regulation, the ability to manage one's experience and expression of emotions. So tolerating and controlling an emotion might be helpful for a child to survive in their environment, but as an adult, it might become an impediment. So for example, it might be very useful to have high grades and have a high-flying career because that is the only way that you as a child gain affection from your parents, praise, and attention. But as an adult, for example, you might realize that your high-flying career was only for your parents and it never actually made you happy. But you can't stop feeling like a failure and you can't quit your job. So tolerating may also become suppressing or ignoring what a child sees as bad emotions. This could be feeling angry, unhappy, or sad. And suppressing and ignoring these emotions may lead to an adult who is unable to, one, feel their emotions, two, process their emotions, and therefore, three, unable to share their emotions in words. What if these narratives that you believe that you grew up with are false? What if you believe the narrative that I am valuable, even without a big career and without lots of money? Or my skin is desirable and beautiful and that I am beautiful? What if you can break free from false narratives? Communicating in virtual reality is very, very different. The way that we communicate right now in modern day is very, very different. David Fontana, a British psychologist, says that the symbols are the language of the mind. Look at how we text one another in our daily life. It used to be a picture paints 1,000 words, but in modern day, it's an emoji, a GIF, a meme paints 1,000 words. Through 3D software, we can now create avatars, rooms, environments, clothes, objects, and the only thing that's blocking us is our imagination. I'm going to argue that 3D assets like virtual objects, rooms, worlds, they're all languages because they are communicating something of the mind with other people. Noam Chomsky, the scholar who single-handedly revolutionized the modern field of linguistics, discusses the evolution of language and lays out the biolinguistic perspective. The idea that a human being's language represents a state of some component of the mind. And if this is true, then virtual objects like avatars, rooms, world objects, they're all languages without words.
Ugh, I just had therapy and it was just the worst experience ever. Zoom sucks. They have no idea what I'm talking about.
Wait, but you've got a VR headset, right?
Yeah, what does a VR headset have to do with therapy, though?
Why don't you try Anomi XR? It's a virtual reality therapy platform. I use it all the time with my therapist. We can be together in the same virtual environment and I can just draw to show them how I feel instead of telling them.
That's so amazing. Where do I go? How do I sign up?
Hi, my name is Nina Salomons.
And I'm Liam McKill.
And we are the co-founders of Anomi XR, a virtual reality therapy platform.
And our mission is to use immersive technologies to help create positive narratives and bring mental health care into the future.
Have you ever felt like this? Some of you might not realize your house is on fire, or you can smell the smoke, but you're told to man up and move on. This meme is how we treat our mental health. Before COVID, mental disorders were already the leading cause of global health-related burdens. With COVID, depression and anxiety disorders have increased. Urgent and emergency referrals for young people have increased by 90% from last year. So, mental health services went online, but with that, they can't read body language, they can't keep their clients from being distracted, they can't keep their clients safe, and ultimately, they lost a lot of clients. We believe virtual reality can help make this journey more accessible, less awkward, and just a little cooler. In 2018, I was hired as an immersive consultant to bring virtual reality into prisons for well-being. Prisoners told me that VR had reduced their thoughts of suicide and self-harm. And meeting them, I thought many of them simply needed mental health support. What if I could put them in a VR headset, have them meet a therapist, and draw how they're really feeling? During lockdown, my bedroom became a prison cell. and I had access to a VR headset, Wi-Fi, and a therapist. In VR, I drew how COVID was ravaging my body and mind to a therapist in Hong Kong. I was able to do this without any words, and I knew then I had to set up Anomi.
So I'm Liam McKill, and I'm the co-founder of Anomi XR. I'm also a virtual reality native. This metaverse thing you're just hearing about now, well, I've been living in it for almost 4 years now. I started building virtual worlds for fun, and for me, it became a form of therapy. This led to me working with big brands to help them to tell their stories in VR. So, when at the beginning of lockdown, Nina approached me and said, hey, look, it's great that you're using this technology to help big brands to tell their stories, but what if we could create a platform that helped people to tell their stories, change their narrative, and also to improve their mental well-being in the process? I knew that this could work because it had already worked for me. We've done over 20 hours of interviews with certified therapists from the British Association of Art Therapy, and we built a prototype based on their needs. Here's a quick clip.
Why don't you make that smaller? Sure. Yes. And how does that make you feel?
It's like a weight off my shoulders.
How do you think your parents feel?
Guilty? They can see me now.
We're building on an already established form of therapy, art therapy. And in virtual reality, you can do things that are impossible in the real world, like scaling objects or changing your perspective. And if the therapist wants, they can put on the VR headset and they can even join their client, or they can run group sessions. Want to paint? Draw in 3D. Too intimidated to paint? You can choose from our pre-built assets like a house, a tree, or a car, and build your scene that way.
As VR headsets become more affordable, we know that Anomi can make therapy more accessible and reduce the strain on mental health services.
Anomi XR is all about telling your personal story in virtual reality, under the guidance of a certified therapist or a coach. Play, identify, communicate without words, and reframe your story.
The Museum of Memories is a VR intervention that I use at the end of our therapy work. In our final session, we leave the virtual therapy rooms where we've spent several weeks of sessions and take a journey together to visit their private art collection. Most of my clients have never had the opportunity to display their own work in a gallery like this, and the experience of visiting a virtual exhibition that's all about them and their feelings and their therapy work is often really moving. It's a moment of real honour as we focus our attention on every aspect of the creations that have emerged during our work together. Or we allow each image to simply be there. We get to slow down, absorb each piece for what it meant to both of us, and think about each memory as it fits into their world now that they're moving on. There are thoughts and feelings that we recognise, and often there's new perspectives that emerge in that moment. There's something about being there together and how VR makes the images larger than life. It demands your attention and respect and reflection. It's often a peaceful, private space, which is just what we need when we're thinking about a tangible way to end a really meaningful online relationship. My clients get a clear choice about whether they want to take their gallery and their virtual tour with them, or leave these memories and experiences of therapy with me. Sometimes the task of curating this exhibition together can feel just as meaningful as the ending. It's that final special moment that I can offer them as a parting gift. Somewhere to put some time and care and attention as they prepare to leave our work. Some clients need to return to it on their own, and they can. Whatever they decide, the visit to the Museum of Memories is a time to acknowledge that we won't be there together again in this virtual therapy space. But they can carry on processing what the therapy has meant to them, just as they will move on in their lives. It's something that VR allows them to do in a really tangible way. And VR helps me to make it a containing and holding space to think about these feelings, even when we're no longer together.
I hope you now understand the power of narrative, language, and symbolism in virtual worlds and how important they are for our mental health, and how Anomi XR uses these to build the future of therapy. And if you're looking to support us, we've also worked with 6 virtual reality artists who've used VR to focus on the theme from negative to positive mindsets.
What are neural nets? Binding texture to 3-dimensional.
They're available on Rarible, and 60% of the proceeds go to the artists and 40% goes to the development of Anomi. We're looking for therapists and institutions that are interested to work alongside us and use Anomi with their clients. We are so excited about the future. Please contact us, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, I'm Kathryn Walker, and I'm the CEO of Revitalist Lifestyle and Wellness. Today I'll be speaking about mental health in the metaverse and also how we can improve access to veterans, athletes, and also first responders. So this is an exciting, evolving topic that many have heard of, but a lot really don't understand the importance of understanding these concepts. So the metaverse, as we all know, is starting to evolve in a way to where it's going to make a global presence seem like it's your neighbor next door, which is a great thing. Very exciting for a lot of individuals who may otherwise not be able to access different parts of the world. So seeing this evolve brings a lot of hope, not only for evolution of, but also the understanding of mental health and increasing access to individuals who may otherwise either avoid the topic or never really seek out the help. So by us providing access to mental health in the metaverse, we're providing additional access to individuals in the privacy of their own home, to where they'll be able to not only seek out in ways that they're more comfortable, but they'll also be getting and receiving effective treatments and methods to where we can actually help individuals with their own mental health while they're at home. So what we have actually created in the metaverse is a clinic called Revitaland. Revitaland will be its own entity, its own land, to where we'll be able to provide pretty much everything that a mental health clinic, a brick and mortar mental health clinic provides. So we'll be utilizing therapists, providers, even meditation, different types of yoga techniques and such, to really help access and engage individuals at home that are just looking for a higher quality of life. What I've noticed as I'm a provider in the space, so I'm an anesthesia provider, I'm also a psychiatry provider, but I've been in the outpatient space now for about 4 years, even though I've been working in the healthcare field for about 20. One thing that I've noticed is when we seek help in the outpatient space, it seems to be very unilateral. So we go to a provider, and then our help becomes what that provider is offering us. And what I've noticed is a lot of individuals that do seek help, if that one provider doesn't align with their values and their ethics and their understanding or the ways that they would like to be treated, then that person actually will stop seeking help for their mental health. So that's something that we really focus on at Revitalist, is providing access for all in the understanding and validating aspects of cultures. Which brings me into the athletics, the veterans, and your first responders. So my background, I told you I am a provider. I also played sports growing up. So I played at a Division I school for a little bit when I was in college. And one thing that I've noticed being a medical provider, also kind of with the mentality that I have of working in higher acuity, critical care, understanding the athletic plans and such, or whatever coaching aspects that we have as we are athletes. I've noticed that veterans and first responders and athletes are a similar culture. And everyone may think I'm crazy when I say that, but what athletes, veterans, and first responders do, every day they have a plan. When they start a game as an athlete, they have a plan. The team has a plan. As a veteran or an active military, when they always have plans. They go over their plans. They have plans to, if it goes this way, what do you do? How do you respond? As a first responder, they all have plans. So every day they get on the job, yes, they're walking around, but they have a plan on what to do when a situation comes to the forefront. So it's controlled chaos per se, to where we know the different steps to take as we need to take them based on the presentation that we have. One thing I've noticed in the outpatient world is it seems there's not a lot of space for the understanding of that for veterans, athletes, and first responders. More so, a lot of times we may be grouped into different types of categories to merge us into different types of cultures. So what I just said may make zero sense, but basically, as a athlete, as I was growing up, I was very aggressive on the courts. And so I played 5 sports. But I was there to win. I didn't care who got in my way. My goal was to win. So therefore, I got, in trouble sometimes, with the or the referees or whatever. But I was dedicated to win. That was my goal. So you could say that's aggression per se in the sport, but there's other types of athletes that do have aggressive behaviors. Yes, a lot of us know those people if we've worked in the sporting arena long enough, or we've been those people. And I actually had a very good conversation with a therapist who is extremely well versed in therapies, multidisciplinaries and such. And her interpretation of my aggression was more so that I had underlying anxiety. That I had underlying anxieties, which was not the case. So trying to hear that aggression of an athlete is underlying anxieties, it didn't align with what I felt and I knew growing up as an athlete. Instead, what I knew growing up as an athlete is I was determined and dedicated to meet the goal of winning no matter what. And that's a very similar mindset when you look at veterans and you look at first responders. We don't care who gets in our way when we're trying to meet the goal that we know we are intended to meet. So understanding that and hearing, one person's perspective, oh, well, it's anxiety or it's underlying childhood trauma or whatever else, versus no, these individuals have been trained to execute to get the goal. That's a common misalignment that a lot of our athletes and our first responders and athletes or first responders and our veterans get brought under that umbrella So therefore, you have these individuals who have been trained to perform in a very, very high-pressured situation that are now being told their performance strategies are because they're anxious. So again, those are two separate parts that just they don't align for those individuals versus the normal civilian world. So when I say civilian world, I mean somebody who, if you're looking at first responders, say they respond to a gunshot wound. Okay, so you walk in onto a scene, right, and then you start doing what you need to do to save that person's life. Saving that person's life is your goal at that time. There's a lot of people in life who they never have, they will never want to, and if they have to, it's going to be probably a significant trauma for them to respond to someone who's had a gunshot wound, or the bottom of the seventh, and when you're supposed to perform in a tied game and everyone's, the game's on your shoulders, you got to perform. Those are significant pieces that athletes and veterans and military know how to respond to. And if they don't know how to respond, they're not going to be in the game much longer or in the profession much longer, because those are the techniques and the strategies that we have to have in order to fulfill the role that we've been trained to do. So when I say training, I think that's a really big, significant piece here. Athletes, military, first responders, they've all gone into the field to be trained to perform under high pressured situations that may occur daily. They may also occur multiple times a day. They may not occur at all. So hearing that, understanding that is a beautiful thing, because that's what makes athletes, first responders, and veterans so precious in our society. We are the ones in the trenches. We are the ones that people love to watch, and we're also the ones that people love to hate when we mess up. But these are the leaders that have been trained to be the influencers for others, either for entertainment or literally life-saving techniques, or for ultimate protection. I mean, that's what our veterans are there for, is for ultimate protection. So, hearing all this, understanding all of this, and looking at the evolution of the Metaverse with the Revitaland, we have created a clinic to make it to where it will be culturally sensitive, not only to our athletes, our veterans, and our first responders, but to everyone. So one thing I've noticed is while in the medical field, we feel that we are very all-encompassing, all-welcoming, all-understanding, we have a lot to learn. So we say that yes, and we want to be that yes. But there's a lot of culture sensitivities when individuals come to us, say they do come from a third world country per se. That individual's culture is going to be very different than someone who comes from Louisiana versus California. Even growing up in rural areas versus, more metropolitan areas, those are all going to be different cultures that we have to understand and value and make sure that we invest in that person. So that's one thing with Revitalists that we really, really focus on, and I really push for our every person who's involved with us, is you look at the person, you hear the person, you don't impose values, you don't impose anything on that person. You hear the person and you try to hear what that person's trying to seek out. So if we want to go further into my backstory, I grew up in a very small rural town in East Tennessee. And in that town, there were a lot of preconceived notions, there still are, of expectations for life. All of which I've never merged, I've never flown well, right? So my whole life it's been, to where I've always felt unique, different, while I did sports and academics and all the other stuff those ways, I'm still learning the evolution of all these different pieces because I've never felt like I fit into the puzzle I was intended to fit into. And knowing that, feeling that, growing up from a small town to where people would ask me, are those your real teeth? Do you wear shoes? Do you actually go to school? Different pieces like that. That really hurts your common, not your common core. We won't go to math. We won't say that piece. It hurts your core values as a person, or it gives you the impression of your core values as a person. So core values is something that at Revitalist that we really focus on to help develop and invest in that person so that person's core values can be heard, they can be empowered, and eventually they can improve their quality of life. So with all of this, with Metaverse, with veterans, with athletes, with first responders, these are all commonalities, but they're very separate, all of which should be understood, valued, invested in, but then also understanding what each of us are as a person, and that we're students every day, and that we're learning every day, and that we shouldn't take everything that we hear from professionals or communities, we shouldn't take all of that as the ultimate truth, because the ultimate truth of the person that we are lies inside us. The truth evolves. The truth evolves based on the additional science and information that we're able to gather in order for us to make a better hypothesis with the data that we have. So one thing with mental health, especially if you're looking at mental health clinics in the metaverse, like most people are going to say, oh, that's crazy, that could never happen, or they're going to say, veterans and first responders and athletes, they're all people. They're right, they are people, but don't group everybody together, because we have to understand whose common values or what core values do each of these individuals have. We need to understand, is it the training of the profession? Is it the culture of which they come from? Is it, we need to look at the individuals. What goals do they have as a person? And I'll tell you, working with a lot of mental health individuals, the goals that they have as individuals, they don't know. So one thing that I've noticed a lot of by speaking to individuals is when you start struggling with your mental health, and I like to say this a lot to individuals, but when you start struggling, you have two things, right? Let's keep it simple. The brain is oh so overly complex. It's beautiful, but let's keep it real simple. You start struggling to where you cannot categorize and you cannot prioritize effectively. So what does that mean? It's very simple in my head because I've seen it several times. But the categorization, the prioritization is when you get out of bed. So when you talk to individuals a lot who have been struggling with their mental health, a lot of individuals you'll see, it's either hard for them to get out of bed or it's hard for them to go to sleep. One thing I've noticed is when the hard part to getting out of bed is because either the world feels so overwhelming or they don't know the first place to step. And that's when I say the categorization, the prioritization is, it feels like there's a lot on everyone's plate and they've lost the sense of what's the next step that I take in order to start clearing some of these tasks off my plate. So what do? They go into a sympathetic nervous system response and they freeze. And they can stay in that response per se to where they just feel like they're surviving and they can't see past, they lose all comprehensiveness out around them, right? So their family's like, they're not engaging anymore, they don't like me anymore, they're not doing all these things. They're not doing that because they're not able to, because they're struggling. They're struggling in their own mind. Their own mind's your worst nemesis, I guess. So when they're struggling in their own mind that way, they stop. So your sympathetic nervous system, a lot of people may not know what that is, but if you don't know, it's your fight or flight system. So it's your fight, flight, freeze. So at one time, at any time, right now, if something were to happen right now, my sympathetic nervous system could kick on because it's my, it's going to save my life, right? Right or wrong, it's just going to save my life. So I always look at it as a triangle. If you can see I always like pictures. Everyone who knows me knows I like pictures. But your triangle. So your triangle with your sympathetic nervous response is your fight, your flight, or over on this side, your freeze. So at one time, give a situation to anybody, they're going to go to one of those three responses. That's it. Fight, flight, freeze. And it could be the exact same situation that's presented, but the individuals who are responding to it may respond completely opposite. So you're going to have some people who want to fight the bear, you're going to have some people who play dead, and then you're going to have some people who run. And actually I did see a bear and I ran. But it was about 8 feet away from me and it was waiting on me per se. But anyway, that was a different situation. But fight, flight, freeze, right? So when you have those situations that happen, your brain, I call those significant events. And when you have those significant events, your brain holds on to those for one reason or another. I'm expecting it's the evolution of the behavioral pieces of almost like muscle memory, but again, there's not much data on that yet. So when that happens, fight, flight, freeze, some people almost get stuck in that. One, they can't get over it. Two, it keeps looping, the rumination piece. So rumination is a thought that just keeps looping and looping and looping, and it unfortunately usually has emotions attached to it as well. And when those emotions are attached to that looping, it's just bad, right? That is when you hear people say, I can't get out of my head, I can't drop it. We see that a lot with teenagers, actually, and usually teenagers, I've noticed when they do try to kill themselves, sometimes it's because they want their brain to stop, to give them a break. And fortunately for us, that ruminating piece is able to be addressed, especially with substances like ketamine and then the other psychedelics. So it's actually able to be addressed. It's able to be disconnected. So in your short-term memory, you have emotions and objects that are attached, right? So right now, as I'm speaking to you, you are sitting there in a physical environment and you're also having the emotional response at all times, and they're merged together. We don't see it that way, but they are. And fortunately with psychedelics, what psychedelics do is they detach those two things. And when they detach those two things as you're utilizing the substance, that's why we really have therapists involved with a lot of this. It disconnects it. And when it disconnects it, you're able to view yourself from a third person view, feeling a first person response. So what that means is individuals, so we give ketamine infusions a lot. Individuals with this who have the constant rumination of circling and circling and circling, it disconnects those two things. And what you're able to do is you're able to sit there and you're able to look at what your body will typically do. Say if you have anxiety, and when you have anxiety, you start breathing real fast, or you start like rubbing your hands on your pants, or you start tapping your foot. While you're receiving the infusion, your body physically will start doing that. It's muscle memory. Your muscle memories start coming to the surface, and when they start coming to the surface, you're not actually feeling the anxiety that's associated with the muscle memory. You're able to see, you know what, my foot's tapping like it usually does when I get anxious. But then you're able to analyze that tapping of the foot. And when you effectively analyze it and understand what your body is doing, your brain processes it. It takes it from your short-term memory where your emotions and your objects are attached to each other, and it puts it into your long-term memory. When it puts it into your long-term memory, your emotions are no longer attached to the situation. You go from feeling like a victim to feeling like someone who is triumphant. We call it triumphant survivor per se, but someone who has not only accomplished that task, but you have succeeded in that task to feel empowered about situations that you may have been through in the past. So that's why this beautiful thing of ketamine and psychedelics and such are going to be such a wonderful thing, especially looking at the metaverse piece, because the neat thing when you look at medications in the brain, the reason medications work in our brain is because we have receptors that are able to understand those medications. So they're able to take the data, and they're able to process the data in order to make a function. Meaning that a lot of the medications that we actually take, we're able to endogenously produce utilizing certain skill sets. So, the medications that we take that have an effect on our body, we're looking at the brain to stimulate the brain utilizing techniques that will make the pharmacy portion of our brain, per se, make them produce more of those techniques, or more of those substances to give you an additional function. So, serotonin, right? So if you look at SSRIs, your serotonin reuptake inhibitors, your SNRIs, those guys deal more with serotonin, norepinephrine and such. Those are all neurotransmitters in our brain, and we take those. We take those because we've told ourselves that we have a chemical imbalance. And do we? I'm sure maybe we do, maybe we don't. I don't know. Are we just not dealing with the core values that we have as individuals? Maybe, I don't know, right? These are all things that we still want to really focus on and evolve as we understand the science more. But there are certain strategies on how you can increase your serotonin naturally, your norepinephrine naturally, your dopamine naturally. We also have one of the strongest hallucinogenics in our brain. So when we say, oh, hallucinogenics aren't natural, right, probably the way that we actually do look into these different pieces of substances that we give, it may not be completely the natural approach, because we're either given way too much or way too little, and we're not looking at really the body's natural production and how much, how do we look at those different pieces of production. So basically, we're able to, all the substances that we take orally, we're able to look at those, and we're looking at different techniques in order to help us produce those naturally occurring substances on our own without feeling like we constantly have to take something every day because we just weren't made right. We have a lot more control than what we know. And the more we understand about ourselves, the more we evolve into the people that we want to be. So this has been a lot of material given at one time, but I won't take you too long. But basically, the point of this talk today is the metaverse has a lot of additional value that we don't even understand yet. So it's something that I would highly tell you to look into, to understand, and then also to constantly try to understand the neurologic capacity of the brain, because there's so much there we just don't understand yet. And the more that we see and understand that our brain is the one who is leading us, not our finger, not our feet, it's our brain. And the more that we can understand the scientific nature of how does our brain not only affect the functionality of our body, but how does the brain also affect the behavioral aspects of the body? And how do we strengthen the brain's different structures in order to not only give us a better or a higher, I guess, emotional intelligence, but also gives us, greater empathy for others, allows us to be more culturally sensitive, not only to the individual cultures based on race or sex or whatever else, but also based on the professional cultures, because those are our cultures. I'll tell you, when I quit sports when I was 20, I had to learn how to shift into the civilian world, and that's a huge transition that, you know, a lot of athletes have really significant trouble doing because their identity is an athlete. So with all of this, with understanding all of this, I would encourage everyone that try to be more open, try to be more understanding, try to understand that we're just now getting to the point that we know a lot in medicine, but a lot of those were neurologic theories, especially in the mental health world. Most of the things that we know about the brain are very theoretical in nature. They're not very scientifically based. And since Yale made the miraculous discovery of utilizing ketamine on the brain back in the late 1990s, we're able to look at real-time evidence. And this real-time evidence is scans. We're able to draw labs. We're able to look at all these different things to where there's a lot of hope for a lot of individuals out there right now. Whether you are a civilian, you're not a first responder, you're not a veteran, you're not an athlete, but you are a person, and a person that has value. So understanding that, you know, I would encourage everyone to constantly try to not improve themselves, but to try to be more understanding and learning of themselves as we all evolve in this life. So thank you for having me. Hopefully as Revitaland comes to fruition, we'll be able to unveil more of that. It's in the alpha testing phases right now, so hopefully the beta phases. So if anyone has any interest in wanting to test during the beta phase, you can always send Revitalist an email, and we can get you on that list for sure. But if you're a veteran or an athlete or a first responder, and you feel like maybe your base isn't as strong as it should be, and you go back to the categorization and the prioritization of tasks, and you're seeing that maybe you're mixing a lot of your home life into your work life, your work life into your home life, or you just don't feel right, or what you used to be, that's always a reason to reach out. So, you know, we have a lot of individuals, while we're just across 7 states, we do have the capacity to help across all several state lines. So always reach out and try to seek the help that you feel like you may need. We're not going to tell you that anything's wrong with you. We're going to help you to try to understand more the person that you are, and help you to invest in that person's values and common core there, to where we can help you to flourish more so in life. So thank you for having me today. GatherVerse is a really super awesome piece that I'm excited to see how it evolves as well. And the Mental Health Springs Wellness Summit, that's a great thing. We need to do it all the time. So thanks so much. Hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you for joining us today. Our presentation is Immersive Design and Indigenous Psychology. My name is Alan, and I'm with Studio Bahia. Studio Bahia is a 501c3 nonprofit where we design, develop, and deploy therapies, training, and therapeutic experiences in virtual reality. Our presentation today will be 15 minutes. It will be divided into 2 parts. First part would be a design philosophy. We're going to use Studio Bahia as an example on how to develop a design philosophy. The second part is Indigenous Psychology. And thank you for joining us. Design philosophy is a set of principles that establishes your value system and what a team believes is good design and why they believe it. Studio Bahia started in refugee camps. It was founded in response to children in crises, in particular children as young as 9 years old committing suicide, self-mutilation. We found in our research and visiting camps that many of the Western psychological practices, such as therapists being sent in or group therapy, did not work because people's in these settings do not have the cultural tradition of speaking to a stranger, their most intimate problems, or in group therapy they would not speak if there was a man present, or because of different socioeconomic differences between people in group therapy. But what we found inside of the camps is that people came in with a mobile phone and a bag of clothes. That's how they arrived. So we decided to try out a Google Cardboard approach. Our team is made up of Cristina, who's a VR developer and a PhD candidate, Renia, VR developer, PhD candidate. Dr. Cindy Dominique is a clinical psychologist. Eva has her PhD in VR narratives. And myself, I'm writing a dissertation on immersive design. We also have another 2 members we should include in this photo. 5 interns this summer and about 16 volunteers throughout the year, so we're a pretty big community. Our product, which we're currently manufacturing 5,000 of these headsets. Our clients are hospitals. Inside our product, we basically get a lunch box. Inside of it, you'll find a bandana, a neck pouch, 2 paintbrushes, some paints, earphones, and a mobile VR headset. As you can see, most of these products have secondary uses, and that's purposeful so that people in refugee camps can use these products for a variety of ways. Some of the therapies that we design and develop include Blue VR as a relaxation therapy, Purple VR is using the sublime to reduce anxiety. Red VR is for people experiencing natural man-made disasters and are in shock. Azure VR is a solution-focused therapy. We also have distraction therapies such as Orange VR, Sepia VR. Yellow VR is for children to reduce the need for sedation before an MRI. Green VR is to reduce preoperative anxiety. Other therapies we have are Light VR, which is the training for natural childbirth. Rose VR is for lazy eye. Pink VR is for chronic pain. Amaranth VR is practicing CPR, learning CPR. Now we're going to describe a little bit of our process. The first step is research. When we have a therapy, a particular mental health concern, whether it's chronic insomnia, whether it's major depressive disorder, whether it's trauma, PTSD, research is the first step. That is followed by the development of concepts for use in this particular therapy. Third step is theories. This particular therapy, Purple VR, is the use of the sublime for the purposes of reducing anxiety. Once we've done that research, our fourth step is a design brief, which is about 10 to 12 pages. The fifth step is a design document, which is between 60 and 100 pages. And inside of that, we also have storyboarding and all of the research done already to support the development of this particular therapy. Sixth step is an ecology plan. It's a little bit of part of storyboarding. From there, we move on to production. These are some examples of production. This particular one is a relaxation therapy. Then we do pilot trials and get feedback from a variety of groups. We work in a couple refugee camps. We work with urban refugees, refugee camps in Uganda, the Rhino refugee camps in Jordan, Turkey. And what we do here is we get a lot of the feedback and improve the therapies. The following step is we release it to the public. What we do is all our therapies are free. It's just a mobile app that downloads into your phone. Our mobile apps are small size actually because we consider refugees, which is our human-centered design approach, they have to walk to a Wi-Fi tower and download this particular therapy, and then they can go back to their tent and they can actually use it without Wi-Fi. This is an example of a landscape, one of our landscapes we designed. We use a lot of neuroscience findings. In this particular one, a neuroscience finding is being able to see the horizon line, which reduces anxiety. Then we do analytics, which has to do a lot with the behavior of people. If you can see on the left, there's a heat map. It tells you a lot of where most people actually move, and it helps us to address bottlenecks within the landscape. Now we're going to cover a little bit of indigenous psychology, but before we do that, a little bit of a summary of what we do as far as a philosophy of design. Studio Bahia doesn't use language, words, or numbers. All our therapies focus on embodied learning, and so our therapies are accessible to anybody in China and India, Europe, Latin America. And so that's a little bit of our design philosophy. Now we're going to discuss indigenous psychology, which is a psychological knowledge that is native, that is not transported from another region, that is designed for its people. For us, we've focused on designing something that is accessible to people all over the world. Our next stage is designing particularly for people of specific locations. Indigenous psychology is a bottom-up approach. And so as an example, we're going to cover a particular trauma that happened to the Japanese people. A disaster called the Fukushima disaster. This is a disaster that happened in 2011. And we're going to describe a little bit about the process in indigenous psychology. That is the research, and then looking for solutions through an application to address a particular trauma. In this particular case, it's the collective trauma of a people, and particularly a very homogeneous society such as Japan. The Fukushima disaster can be described as something overwhelming in many ways because of the variety of qualities of it, being both an earthquake, tremors, water, radiation, and an absolutely shocking event for people. It can be described as something not too different from a pandemic in a way because of the radioactive quality of it, which is an enemy that's kind of invisible in a way. So first we begin with a description of how that phenomenon was felt by people, and collecting that data as far as how people experience that phenomenon. The second part of that is an explanation and an understanding of regularities and why these phenomenons happen, how this phenomenon happened. And so in this particular case, we have a large-scale earthquake which to what is a tsunami, which is a tidal wave, an ocean tidal wave that finds its way inland, and in that process destroys what is a nuclear plant, releasing nuclear material throughout a whole region, including the ocean. Now, applications as far as indigenous psychology, and we're going to discuss very briefly a little bit of an example of a particular therapy, a very grassroots approach that was found during and after the fact of this disaster. In this particular case, we have a farmer living in Japan, and this elderly farmer had lost some family members and decided to put a phone booth on his property, and he would use this phone booth to be able to talk to his dead relatives. And so this was done, he installed his phone booth prior to this natural disaster, and was, this got out after the disaster, and people started to flock to this particular phone booth. Over 10,000 people came to this phone booth to be able to talk to their dead relatives that had died during the Fukushima disaster. So this is an example of a more grassroots, more spontaneous application of an indigenous psychology therapy, but a good example of how a lot of therapies do surface in that way. Another example of applications in being able to attend to this trauma, in this sense, somewhat of a collective trauma for the Japanese people, was the development of plays by playwrights. And so plays would be able to find the language, the scenarios, the social cues for being able to discuss the subject of the loss of life, the destruction, the loss of habitat, the loss of jobs, the loss of a way of living, the impact on nature. So in this particular application, we have a scene of two different plays addressing the particular disaster in different manners. And then you have a third example of what is a tour bus, theater bus, that traveled throughout the region and performed different plays that addressed the trauma that people felt at the time. These are examples of indigenous psychology and therapies done collectively to address the trauma of the Japanese people. In a VR application, we would look at, Studio Bahia would look at hiring and partnering with Japanese anthropologists, Japanese playwrights, Japanese psychologists, sociologists, historians, therapy historians, to be able to understand the Japanese people and to have them, just equip them to develop the therapy themselves. Studio Bahia would play more of a supportive role on a technical basis based upon those of the needs of our Japanese colleagues. This is an example of how we would deploy ourselves to address the collective trauma of a nation and in creating a therapy that would address their trauma. Thank you. This is just one of many examples, but thank you for listening to us today. We welcome any of your questions, any of your thoughts. Get in touch with us. We're a nonprofit. If you have suggestions for therapies, or if you'd like to join us, we have a volunteer program. We also have an internship program. And actually, we welcome your thoughts, your ideas. And we're also a 501c3 nonprofit, so if you want to do a tax-deductible donation, you're more than welcome to. Thank you again for your time, and please have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.